these kind of conflicts are only ever ultimately solved politically, or they're not solved at all. And so that is not something that the current administration, the most right-wing in Israeli history, is really willing to address right now. And again, that is a source of enormous frustration for everyone, but particularly the Americans.
I always remember when the Ukraine war started, one of the questions that everybody asked was, what does victory for Ukraine look like? And it seemed that there were different views of that from different parties around the world. And it seems maybe we're in a similar situation, does it, between the US and Israel with where this particular war goes?
Well, I think where the US and Israel are on the same page is that they wish to see the end of Hamas, and Hamas removed as the governing power as well as the aggressor from Gaza towards Israel. The question is really how you go about doing that. Is it achievable, and what you do afterwards? So I think one of the things two things causing intense anxiety at the moment with the Americans. One is the civilian death toll in Gaza and the level of destruction, the intensity of the destruction, and seeing the effect that's having on the public mood around the world, something of a backlash beginning. And also the fact that they don't feel very confident that Israel has a plan for what comes after. And I gather that all the American diplomats and officials who've come through and spoken to Benjamin Netanyahu have found him barely willing, I think was a phrase they used, to discuss an exit strategy. So the problem is the Israelis will talk, if government officials will talk about a window of legitimacy that they believe they have. Because of the absolute horror of the Hamas attacks and what they did and that brutality, that they felt that they had more backing to go in hard. But a few things have been happening since that. We've seen some shifting language from the different sides. So, for example, on October the 18th, the Americans actually vetoed a UN resolution calling for a humanitarian pause. Now, that is not a ceasefire, which is also, of course, a very live issue, including in the UK, whether you support a ceasefire or not. A humanitarian pause would be something to get more aid in. And this is something the Americans seem to have changed their tune on. So they vetoed that resolution. And I think that they don't want Israel's hand to be forced by the UN, but they would like that pause now. So they've started talking about it. And then we saw, I think it was 2 nights ago, Netanyahu gave an interview to American television news, and he said that they were prepared to consider these pauses. He called them tactical little pauses. That was read in Washington of, we've got through to him, he's listening to us. But then he went on to say that Israel would probably have to be in charge of security over Gaza for an indefinite period. And I think that immediately, had the hackles up in Washington, and people were concerned, what on earth does he mean by that? Because it sounds rather like an Israeli reoccupation of Gaza. So what the Americans have rushed out and said is that no, they don't support that happening, and an Israeli reoccupation. And then again, they've had to recalibrate and say, well, it might be necessary for a very limited amount of time. So I think we're seeing both sides signaling what they want, but the Americans very clearly trying to pull the Israelis in a direction that can calm things down.
Do you think that, assuming they do get that one bit of commonality, i.e., getting rid of Hamas, that at some point America might say to Israel, "Do you know what? That you have to find a way to give the Palestinian people some land of their own, that there has to be a state in order that this can be a lasting solution."
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that's, a month into this is being talked about a lot more. It's very hard to see how you can actually, one, destroy Hamas even militarily, but two, how you can destroy how you can end the issue of the fight for a Palestinian state, if that desire still exists. You can't kill it off militarily. And, you know, these kind of conflicts are only ever ultimately solved politically, or they're not solved at all. And so that is not something that the current administration, the most right-wing in Israeli history, is really willing to address right now. And again, that is a source of enormous frustration for everyone, but particularly the Americans. So you're seeing them talking more and more about it in the context of this offensive. And in fact, the G7 have just come out with a statement. Obviously, America signed on to that, in which they reiterate their support for a two-state solution. But again, we've got to remember here that Benjamin Netanyahu is not an Israeli leader who has ever really wanted to be the man who gave over land to the Palestinians for a state. That's not what he wants his legacy to be. And he's, in the last couple of days, come under some pretty heavy criticism, excuse me, from two of his predecessors, Ehud Barak and Olmert, who've said, you know, this is a consequence of your attempts to manage the Palestinian situation and never to solve it. So that is a very live issue here for him.
Just one final one. How much do you think that's the slight apparent change in the Americans' position that you spoke about in your first answer is because of the relative looming US election? Does Joe Biden want there to be sort of significant time between the end of this and his clear support for it, and, you know, what seems to be waning support for him from Americans over the issue before the election, in order that they, you know, quotes, forget about it as an issue?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it would be extremely naive to discount the election calendar and how it plays into all of this. I mean, public opinion in the US has shifted over the decades much more towards the Palestinians, not more than it was towards the Palestinians, not more than towards, and the profile has changed. So people who are sort of very uncritically supportive of Israel, they actually tend to be not Jewish voters, but evangelical, and they're not really people who Biden would be expecting to win their votes from. So they're parked there, even though they may like the support he's given. People who feel more sympathetic to the Palestinians are more likely to be Democrats. And if they feel that Biden has played this wrongly, and the polls are not looking great for him in terms of how he's handled this, the opinion polls, then those are voters who could well stay at home, even if they're not going to vote for his rival. You've even got communities that might be significant in swing states, like you've got an Arab American community in Michigan, which is one of those states that could be decided on a small margin. And then you've got the issue of college students who tend to be quite Palestinian sympathetic. There's a lot of college towns that are in states where their Democrat-leaning vote is required to cancel out the Republican one. So unquestionably, there will be a link.